Good morning, everybody, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Thank you for joining us today for our Coffee and Crypto Chat series. My name is Bridget Kerwin, and I am part of the Graduate Student Programs and Services team at Duke's Pratt School of Engineering. I'm really excited to have you join us for our final FinTech conversation of the spring semester. For those of you who have joined us for one of our chats before, you know that Lee Reiners from Duke's Law School is often with us to provide a perspective that many times can differ from that of Jimmie Lenz. While Lee is not able to be with us today, we do have a very special guest, so I'm sure the conversation will be just as lively. So with that, today's Coffee and Crypto Chat will be between our very own Jimmie Lenz, who is the director of the Master of Engineering program in FinTech, and Jack Speer, who is a newscaster at NPR. So before we jump into the discussion, I will ask each of them to provide a very brief introduction about themselves, just so you understand a little bit more about their perspective during this conversation. And we'll go ahead and start with you, Jimmie.
Thank you, Bridget. It's great to be here this morning and great to have Jack here with us. So as Bridget mentioned, I am the director of the Master of Engineering in FinTech and the Master of Engineering in Cybersecurity at Duke. I have a long history in finance and a shorter history in academia. But while I was in finance, I did do a lot of work on more cutting edge technologies, algorithmic trading, electronic trading, and a lot of things like that. And that brought me to a lot of what crypto is, I think, these days. It is certainly pioneering new areas of finance in terms of decentralized finance, or DeFi as we know it. And so I'm really excited to speak with someone like Jack this morning, who has not only the perspective of someone who has been in the news, literally, presenting us the news for quite a while, but also an academic himself. So with that, I will throw it over to Jack Speer.
Thank you, Jimmie. And you put up a board for me. Thanks. I put that together myself. I guess that was a pre-put together board. Like Jimmie, I'm a fairly recent arrivee in the world of academia, but I have been in media for a long time. Been in media for about 30 plus years now. Covered a lot of big news events, September 11th terror attacks, a host of other things. I was mostly a business journalist though for the last, and still sort of think of myself as a business journalist now, even in the latter part of my career. I anchor the hourly news for All Things Considered now, but I have a heavy business sort of focus at times if you listen to me. And that is because I was a business journalist for most of my career. Covered markets, covered manufacturing, the airline industry, the transportation industry, covered the big automakers. I was in Detroit a lot, and have been watching with great interest what's been going on in the cyber currency world and cryptocurrency world, and think that there's some real interesting things I'd like to, I'm sure we'll talk about in today's conversation, but there is a definite collision at the moment going on between the Wild West of cryptocurrency and the regulatory reality of Washington. And I have a perspective on that I'd be happy to share with you guys. And I'm sure Jimmie has his perspective too, which is more of an engineering sometimes perspective than mine. So with that, I'll just say, yes, I'm an adjunct at Johns Hopkins. I teach mostly master's finance students, many from China, basic communication skills, how to write a memo, how to do an individual presentation, how to do a white paper, an executive summary, group presentation, and all that kind of thing. So that's sort of my quick bio.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Jack. That gives, I think, a really good perspective on things. And so, so you mentioned the where things are colliding now. You know, we have the crypto world, and we have the regulatory world, and then I think we have traditional finance, which I think is a third kind of area of conflict. But what I'd like to jump into is kind of that regulatory world, because over the last 24 hours, we've seen an impact, right? We've heard from some of the regulators about, trying to maybe orchestrate, I would say, a little bit different regime around Bitcoin in particular, but cryptocurrencies. And it's with the intent, supposed intent, of stopping different kinds of nefarious activities. And I won't even go into the detail of what those might be. And so you have that perspective of not only the news professional, but also a Capitol Hill professional, because you're coming to us from DC. So it would be great to get kind of your thoughts around just what's happened kind of in the last 24 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all saw a lot of developments last week in this space in terms of what happened with Coinbase and some other things that went on earlier in the week. And every once in a while, Fed Chairman Powell has something to say about it. He kind of skirts it on the edges, but he's out there talking about it a little bit, saying things like he's not sure whether it's a good investment or a store of value. And then we hear from the SEC, who says that, has a somewhat inconsistent approach in terms of how the SEC, the main Wall Street's main watchdog group, sort of views crypto. They're saying, they don't know that they have an inconsistent approach. They're not sure exactly how to approach it. So there's I think we're at an inflection point with cryptocurrencies and how Washington and regulators here are viewing them. They don't really totally understand them. They don't think of them as quote unquote securities in the first place. That's the SEC's thing. They're not sure it is a security. It's a storehouse of value. People understand that. They understand the blockchain aspect of it. But the regulators can't figure out how to get their heads around it, I don't think. The banks are unclear whether they want to get involved. And the reason the banks are showing, I believe, the reticence they're showing is because of the uncertainty on the part of the regulators. The banks want to know that they are doing something they're not going to get in trouble for, and they want consistency, and they're not getting the consistency from the regulators that's making them comfortable. That's sort of my short take on where we are, especially with the SEC and the Fed to some degree.
Well, I think the SEC has even sent conflicting messages among itself, right? Because we just had a proposal out last week from one of the commissioners, or at least one of the commissioners is kind of, I guess, spearheading it, around cryptocurrency and in particular around some of the investment side, safe harbor and things like that for tokens. And so it does seem that even amongst themselves, and this isn't unusual for the SEC, you have 5 commissioners with 5 different points of view, but it does seem like those conflicts are pretty constant. From your perspective, and I'm certainly willing to offer mine, but from your perspective, I think the kind of the last thing you brought up around the banks is really pertinent, because I do think that there is a lot of pressure from some of the traditional financial services organizations. And some people have been very, very vocal, although I think they probably were reluctant after they said it, about some of the things that are going on in fintech and the DeFi space, basically saying that it was unfair competition and things like that. Of all people from people that are in the established financial services companies. And when I think about things like that, I think about, wow, how about all those, the 10,000 community banks that were put out of business by these large financial organizations? I think they would have said the same thing. Wow, that was unfair. And so do you think there's actually more pressure coming from, those traditional sources or from the regulators? Because it seems like the regulators are kind of unsure, but the traditional sources, maybe they're not as unsure.
Well, I think, again, the traditional sources want to know they have a consistent climate in which to work. And don't forget, the traditional sources are getting a lot of pressure from their customers. Customers are driving some of this. Customers of a lot of these banks are saying, we want to get involved in cryptocurrency. We want you to administer it for us in some shape or form. And that's causing pressure. That's putting additional pressure on these financial institutions to sort of get on board. This is something the customers are saying they want. And yet the financial institutions are saying, well, wait a minute, what are the regulators saying to us? Because that's who we really have to sort of deal with here in this universe. And I think there's kind of multiple pressures going on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that that's the case. So I'll shift a little bit here, and I know you and I have talked about DeFi and some of the decentralized finance functions that are offered kind of via crypto, and through a number of the different exchanges. And the fact that Coinbase went public last week, and that was, obviously it just brought in so much, I think, interest from people, whether you're involved in the space or you're not. You couldn't ignore, something like that. But the decentralized finance space, I see as a, maybe the next or maybe the only avenue for kind of a quality in investment. It offers, the retail investor access to things that they're just not going to get at most of the traditional financial services companies. And yes, I'm very overt about not calling anybody out, but they just can't get those kinds of things. And so going forward, it seems like it's almost a natural that it will attract more people, whether it's offered by one of the big, financial services companies, or it's offered by, Binance or Coinbase or even Robinhood, right? Is that kind of what you're seeing? Is it's going to happen no matter what? The people maybe aren't as choosy about the avenue anymore?
Yep. Yes, that's exactly what I'm seeing. And Dogecoin, of course, is a great example of that, which is being to some extent celebrity driven. And NFTs are also to some extent being, and that's a whole nother area we could talk about. Because I have some involvement through the Screen Actors Guild and knowing what's going on in Hollywood a little bit. And there's a lot of interest in Dogecoin and NFTs and everything else coming from the entertainment world. I mean, people talk about Dogecoin and all the jokes with the Twitter tweets from Elon Musk and the Snoop Dogg comments. And, I mean, this is all, again, we're talking about something that is very, probably in some cases, not necessarily even as understood by the celebrity community, but they're interested in it because it's making.
Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. It does seem to be that, and this happens for a lot of things. Let's face it. I mean, Twitter probably wouldn't be Twitter if you hadn't had some celebrities join on, right? So a lot of these things are certainly going to be celebrity driven. But at its core, just to kind of turn back a little bit, I do think decentralized finance and some of the products being offered there are the same or very similar to things that institutions have been doing for a long time. And so I think that the quality of access to me is one of the most compelling parts about it. I would love to see more opportunities, because I think in the retail public sphere, the opportunities are shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. We've seen, the number of publicly listed securities. I mean, this, you're a business guy, drop, by over 50% in the last decade. We're seeing fewer and fewer true unique investments. It's harder and harder, I think, for the retail public to buy into individual things, right? That Wall Street wants to sell them packaged products because, let's face it, they make a lot of money selling packaged products. I do see this as an opportunity, but also maybe one of the few access points that retail investors truly have to unique investments that almost anybody can afford.
Right. And you wonder how long that's going to last. Just for fun last week, because of course everything was going crazy, I bought a couple of shares of Bitwise, which is an index fund that basically tracks the top 10 cryptocurrencies. And, you can watch it go up 20%, down 15% all over the place just for fun. And right now, the volatility level, I think, is going to scare a lot of traditional investors out of the marketplace. I think, on the other hand, how much regulation do you want in there when you're talking about that aspect of stored value and differentiation? And you can talk about it with NFTs too. That whole idea of a non-fungible token is really taking off because you own that unique piece. And a lot of people are involved in that space. And that's a whole nother way of having basically shareholder value, whatever you want to call it, in one clearly defined unit that no one else has access to, unlike Bitcoin, which would be fungible.
Right. And that the NFT space is, as you said, a unique space kind of in itself. There is a question that PJ raised, and I just wanted to make sure everybody kind of heard, because I think you have a perspective on this. If all major institutions, Goldman, BlackRock, JP Morgan, et cetera, pile in, would regulators really give pushback? What are your thoughts, Jack?
I said I think yes, because it's going to force the regular, and I don't necessarily mean push back in that they would say no. I mean you'll force their hand, and I think that maybe is the question he's asking. If everybody piles in, I think they're going to have to make more of a, they're going to have to take more of a stand and make more of a decision here. And I think that may be also where we're going. We talk about this whole idea of an inflection point with crypto, and I think we are at that point. And I think once critical mass gets reached, the regulators have to come up with something. Now, we just had Turkey ban crypto, right? Ban
Right.
Bitcoin the other day, which is another response. That's a response basically by a country which has a fiat currency, which is a whole nother issue. There's a lot of push-pull on this because, of course, you have a global concept behind all this too that sort of negates the whole idea of national currencies to some degree. And all this is making regulators just real nervous. Because why do you need a central bank?
Yeah, it raises the question, certainly. And I think that when we see what's happening, I'm glad you brought up global, because this is, our perspective being here in the United States is that of the United States, of course. But you're right, this is certainly an international, global phenomena that's occurring, and we see it occurring in places that normally I would say are not leading. So we see a lot of lesser developed areas that are very prolific in the blockchain space, and in particular in some of the cryptocurrency spaces. But along those lines, just a couple of weeks ago, we had China come out with a beta test of their central bank digital currency. 6 of the major banks there are involved in the beta test. But even beyond that, we're seeing a lot from the retail side. They have COIS set up at metro stations. They have point of sale terminals. They have a lot of things like that. And so it is a pretty prolific test on top of this national blockchain that they have. So they've gone, I think, maybe a couple of steps further in China in instituting this national blockchain, and now this digital currency, central bank digital currency. Will that, certainly we've heard some things from Capitol Hill on that, but would it be a real impetus for other countries, the US, UK, EU, to jump on board? Do you think that's going to push that regulatory burden a little bit further?
Yeah, I think it will. They're certainly aware of it. And I think from an engineering perspective, I'd almost like to hear your thoughts on the differences between where different countries are at the moment, where China is versus the US, where you think maybe the EU is versus us. And I would sort of, if I just had to do a rough ranking, I'd probably put China, us, and the EU in that, maybe in that order. The EU is probably, my feeling is less sort of moving ahead with this than maybe we are, which is a horrible way to phrase it. But I don't think the EU is moving as aggressively as we are in terms of crypto, but I think China is.
Yeah, I think China is. I think they've embraced the idea of blockchain. So I would phrase it, I think, a little bit differently. I think they've embraced blockchain there as an underlying technology, and also digital cryptocurrency, or a digital currency. But it's a kind of a side, a little bit of a side to the actual technology, the underlying technology. Whereas other places, I think, are being a little bit more driven by the digital currency aspect of it rather than the technology. The EU certainly talked about it a lot. You've seen a lot of the finance folks there on the regulatory side talk about it, but I think it probably hasn't progressed very much further than that. It doesn't seem like we're seeing as much come out of the EU right now. That said, I do see a fair amount of companies that are doing things like NFTs and some other things coming out of Europe. But I would agree with you. I don't think it's quite as prolific as we see in China or the US. That said, China may be ahead as far as a central bank digital currency, but I think this US is still, just way ahead of anybody as far as innovation in the fintechs, or in the cryptocurrency, the DeFi space. We're still seeing a lot come out of the United States, and I think that will, and part of that is because the 6 banks that are adopting it are all, the state has a stake in all of those. It is a national blockchain, and there are people that don't want to use a national blockchain, right? They want to do something a little bit different. So I think that there are some differences in the way that, we're thinking about it, maybe between the U.S. and China and the EU. I don't know what your thoughts are, Anna.
Oh, absolutely. I was going to ask you too, how you think Wall Street views blockchain. How do the people on Wall Street view the blockchain concept in general?
I think that there was a mad rush about 4 years ago to understand the technology, and I think everybody was looking for it to do something really revolutionary. I think they were looking for it to be the next giant thing, and instead, I think what we're finding is that this is longer term. This is there is certainly blockchain technology is going to have improvements over traditional processes and things like that. So I think that improvements come in increments. It's not going to be this giant leap. It's going to take probably 10 years to really fully appreciate some of the things that are happening. But that said, I think they are taking some cues, and I think they are watching the DeFi space really closely, because this is something that could directly impede Wall Street's ability to sell to the public. Can you imagine if all of a sudden the SEC came out and said, well, we're going to allow, and by the way, this is just me posturing this. This isn't, I don't know if anybody's considering this, but what if they came out and said, hey, you can put cryptos in your IRAs?
Sure.
What do you think would happen if that occurred? I mean, my personal view is that Wall Street will probably enter the crypto space, not the blockchain space, but the crypto space in kind of not very sexy, kind of boring ways. I could see custody and things like that,
Right,
that they do really, really well. Those are that's kind of how I see them kind of inching into the space, doing things like that. But that's what I'm thinking on that side. The actual blockchain technology, there are some places that are ahead of others on Wall Street, but I don't think anybody has fully embraced it the way you see it being embraced in the decentralized finance space.
I think we're close, though. I agree. I think we're edging in that direction. It may take 10 years, but it may take less.
It may take less. I mean, we're only a little over a decade into since the Satoshi Nakamoto paper was made public. So I mean, for a technology that's been around just over a decade, it's had a huge impact. I think that when I look at some of the things that are happening, I saw the other day that Bitcoin by market cap went over $1 trillion. To me, that's substantial. That becomes substantial when you go over $1 trillion.
Yeah.
There are a lot of projects out there that are being supported by different currencies. And then, of course, you have things like Ethereum and Ether. And Ether is part of the, you have to use Ether to basically do things on Ethereum. So it's not just a token out there, not just a coin, but it's a means, it's a utility, it's a means by which you access it. And I think those kinds of things are not as understood possibly by some people as they might be. I think those kinds of, from right now, from the retail perspective, those stories are harder to come by. Maybe you guys need to do start doing like a 15-minute segment once a week, or half an hour segment once a week.
Probably should.
Yeah.
Certainly could.
I think
most of the people who I've seen tackling it are tackling it in kind of a, here's what it is. I'm going to give you an explanation, and we're going to go through what is cryptocurrency and what is Dogecoin and how did it get founded and what's the Shiba Inu mean? And, I mean, really, that's the level that I think most of the media, probably myself included, have been taking a look at cryptocurrency in terms of what we're disseminating to the public on it. Because a lot of people in the public don't quite get the concept of what it is. They don't understand the whole blockchain technology. They're certainly confused about crypto as they are about NFTs. I mean, I get a lot of people asking me, what's an NFT? What's a crypto? So we're kind of doing it on just an explanatory basis without and then maybe reporting the latest breathless thing about Coinbase, or, somebody going, a Bitcoin being worth $60,000 or whatever it's worth at the moment. And we will report those things, but we're not giving much context. I would agree.
I do think that mainstream media has, obviously they seize onto the big stories, the Coinbase story.
Right.
You're going to see, I get that. But I do think that understanding the technology, understanding kind of some of that, the basics of what's going on in the space are really important, because it is attracting a lot of global attention. It is attracting, I think, a lot of longer term investment. One of the things that I hear pretty often, sure, there are a lot of guys out there trading cryptocurrencies and things like that. I was doing a lecture to one of my classes the other day, and I was showing the global span of active traders, and it's fairly huge, as you can imagine, and it is definitely global. But one of the things that I think you don't sometimes recognize is how many people I've heard say, I bought Ethereum, or I bought Bitcoin or something like that, 2 years ago, and it's a long-term investment. I have no reason to sell it. I have no intention of selling it. I think you're starting to get some mainstream, what I call mainstream investors, that are long-term investors in the space, which is not what I ever see in the media.
Right.
You see kind of the frenzy stuff, but I don't think you ever see as much of that kind of thing.
Yeah, the journal piece I saw that was that if you bought Dogecoin at the beginning of the year, you could buy a Tesla Model S now. If you bought however many shares of it, 1,000 shares or something, I don't know, whatever the number was. But yeah, I think some people are buying it and just holding it because they want to see what happens. They're not really, I don't think everyone's sure how it's going to shake out. Some of these, if you look at the cryptocurrency index, it goes page after page after page. There's I don't know how many cryptocurrencies there are, but there's a lot.
Thousands.
And
yeah.
How many? I can't even.
There are thousands.
Yeah, right. So no one, how you would pick winners and losers in this space at this point seems to me to be somewhat difficult. But I can see people buying some of the established ones, holding them, thinking things will shake out, and perhaps my investment will be worth more in the future. But the volatility is high.
Right. I agree with you 100%, Jack. I think that there are a lot of those that are trying to pick what are the blue chips. I think that, and this is why I would really like to see a little bit more information on kind of some of the underlying projects. Why is this coin worth more than the next one? Besides the fact that there's a celebrity talking about it, what else is out there that would provide us with, with a little bit more? And I think that would be really interesting to see in the media. But to your point about the underlying technology, that's even less discussed. The idea of blockchain and some of the things that are going on there, because we are seeing a lot of really interesting things going on in the blockchain space. At the very beginning, we had some big companies in it that were making a huge splash, companies like IBM, Hyperledger, and things like that. And now I think it has tapered off. Well, it hasn't tapered off, it's broadened out. And so now you see a lot more companies out there that are doing things that are looking at kind of the underlying technology and some of the advantages that it provides. And so we're getting a broader and broader and broader swath of the application of the technology. Just by, you and I have talked about this a little bit. I have a Coursera course that I do for Duke. And it's a totally different kind of student. And I've talked to a lot of them. In fact, there are at least a couple of them on this right now, I see. And it's interesting because they tend to be not what people expect. They are a little bit older than I think what most people think about when they think about cryptocurrencies and blockchain. They are professionals in totally different industries. It's across the board: real estate, consulting, Capitol Hill, all kinds of different places. And they are joining strictly for the information, to learn what is it about this technology. I'm teaching in engineering school, so everything's pretty applied. So they get their hands dirty building a few things. We build virtual wallets and some smart contracts and ERC20 tokens and things like that. but I think there is a real craving for knowledge. How can this be applied to my industry? It reminds me a lot, and you and I are old enough to remember when PCs became really ubiquitous, when we started seeing PCs on everybody's desk in the, I guess, late 80s, early 90s, when you had companies like Microsoft rolling out, an operating system that anybody could use, Windows 95. That was probably probably the best thing to ever happen to the PC industry. Those kinds of things. And we're starting, I think people are starting to imagine those kinds of applications for blockchain. So just on the underlying technology side, even besides the crypto, and then crypto provides a different perspective completely, because to me that's kind of an end product, if you will, of the blockchain technology and some of the cool stuff that we're seeing. So you get to talk to a lot of people in in the media and in other areas. What's the general feel about crypto? That it's just a speculative thing, or are people really thinking about it in terms of long-term investment, or are they just unsure? What's the general?
I think in the popular press, I think people are unsure. I think you really hit some interesting points there, though, Jimmy, because we've talked about this. Our students now, at least some of our students, no longer say the ultimate goal here is to go work for Goldman Sachs, right? They want to form their own cryptocurrency and become cryptocurrency billionaires. And so there's a whole change in the mindset of the students we work with. And I'd love to hear from some of you folks out there about what you think about this. But that's definitely a factor. I think the popular press and, as I said, the media itself is sort of fascinated and captivated by the whole thing. If you look at the demo of who are investors in the cryptocurrency space, clearly you mentioned some of the older people who are involved in your Coursera classes. They're interested, but they're not the primary investors. It goes millennials, Gen X, boomers, and you can see the numbers on who's invested actually in the space. But then there's a big, huge group of who might be interested in being invested in the space, presumably if they knew more. This is the classic early adapter versus somebody who waits till the bugs are ironed out of the model a little bit more. And I would certainly put myself in that space. I'm generally not an early adapter. I'm interested in the space, but I may not plunge into the space right away. And that's, for technology, I think that's often the case for a lot of people. When smart TVs came out, I wasn't the first one to buy a smart TV, but I got in the space when the smart TV I felt was ironed out. And PCs sort of the same way. I mean, you talked about the transition into PCs. I probably held on to my IBM Selectric for as long as I could get away with it. And then they said, okay, you're going to go to the PC. And I did. And I think the same is true with crypto. And I mentioned I bought a couple things of Bitwise the other day just to watch it. But, I'm not rushing out and putting all of my life savings into Bitcoin or Ethereum or Dogecoin or anything like that at the moment, but definitely interested. And I think that's sort of where the media's bread and butter, the main audience, is at the moment too. I think they're very interested, especially Gen X and definitely millennials. And boomers are interested too, but and boomers, of course, would have the most money to put in there, but they're the least in the space at the moment.
Yeah,
that'll change.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The fact that there are this is more generational, but that's, I think, probably the case for everything. Younger people. I mean, when you and I were younger, we were probably a little less risk averse, or a little more. And as we've gotten older, we've become more so. But that's just what happens. I mean, I'm fascinated by some of the ideas, some of the things that I've seen my students come up with around projects and things like that using blockchain, not just so much cryptocurrency, but blockchain and smart contracts. That the notion of smart contracts, I think, are that not only can you do things in the financial space, but it can maybe usurp some other areas of the law, for instance. I mean, the question comes up quite often. Well, this is a contract, it's a smart contract, but is it enforceable by law? No, it's enforceable by code, which I would say is much more dependable. And we can certainly look at code and we know it's very binary. This thing's going to happen if this activity occurs.
think I froze here, gang.
But I do think that it's an interesting it's a really interesting area that is starting to kind of explode. So another question here: what's the sentiment amongst other media professionals in regard to inflation and viewing crypto as a hedge against it?
I sort of typed an answer in there, but I mean, we've had so little inflation in the past 10 years. I don't know whether the general investing public is viewing that as the ultimate hedge here or not. There is an interest. Obviously, we think inflation is going to heat up this year. Growth is supposed to be 6% plus for the recovery in terms of post-pandemic kind of forecast for the year. So most people think there's going to be some inflation. In fact, we are seeing signs of it already. So is crypto a valid hedge against inflation? And I think that's one thing people are definitely looking at, myself included. But I don't know to what extent we're going to see inflation. And that, of course, has a lot to do with the actions taken by the central bank and Fed Chairman Powell and the other people who are on the, who are members of the Fed's open market committee. And we just don't really know. So I think there's a potential there as a hedge. There are, of course, other hedges. There's plenty of other hedges people can use too, traditional hedges, commodities, gold is obviously a traditional hedge people have used for years. So I don't know. I think I would say there is some interest in that, but I think you have to see what inflation does.
I think it's a great question, PJ, around the idea of inflation. I personally think that where the cryptocurrency and DeFi space isn't quite developed enough for this to be a real inflation hedge, and primarily because we don't really have a derivatives market. There is, but it's not a defined derivatives market. And that's really what you need, I think, to one, it will stabilize cryptocurrency a little bit. Right now, as of the last count, and I just did this last week for my class, there are about 509 cryptocurrency exchanges. There, I think, are 259 that are covered, that are somewhat covered by one of the industry groups. There is no common linkage. There aren't really common APIs or anything like that. So it makes it difficult to hedge out differences. And as we all know, I mean, if you look at 2 or 3 cryptocurrency exchanges, you'll see different prices on those exchanges, right? So we don't have a derivatives market yet. We don't have a way to, although I know there are people working on this, so we don't have a way to really hedge out those arbitrage opportunities. And that's where we start to get some stability. And I think we really need a little bit more stability before we can say, this is a good inflation hedge. When something moves, 2 or 3, 4, 5% a day, it's hard to consider that an inflation hedge. And as I said, I think a more mature derivatives market, which I know is happening, but I think that's really necessary. It was kind of like when the dollar came off of the gold standard back in the early 70s in 72. And Milton Friedman came out with a couple of papers, one paper in particular that highlighted the need that, well, not even the need, that we would have to have a more mature derivatives market because people will need to be able to hedge out the volatility. And I think that's the same case probably here. And the derivatives may look totally different. They may not be what we've come to know, financial futures and options and things like that. Maybe it'll be something different. Hey, maybe somebody on this call will be one of the people that invent that new thing that we can use. And so I think that market is still so nascent that it kind of renders the question a little bit moot, because just the volatility itself, I think, makes it difficult to use as an inflation hedge. That's my economist hat, kind of tailored with my engineering hat.
Yeah, absolutely. Jimmie, you, as far as I'm concerned, that nails it. I would say the same thing. Excessive volatility does not a great hedge make. And that's part of the reason that people use things they have used, that I mentioned some traditional hedges. Yes, there's some volatility there, but not to this level.
Right.
And until there's some kind of way, I think, that people would view it as having some stability. Now, I guess you could break it down to the individual level, but even Bitcoin had a huge swing over the weekend, right?
Right.
Saturday it went down 14% or something I saw. So it's hard to hedge with that kind of volatility.
I agree, Jack. I think that when and this is part of a maturing market, of any maturing market, right? We have to kind of know that we have some faith, I guess, that we've ironed some of those things out, that we have historic correlations. Right now, we have nothing that looks like a historic correlation. It's just kind of the nature of what's going on, I think, in the industry. But any nascent industry has this kind of issue. There's just nothing we can do about that. So I think it is I think that this is a really interesting time to be doing this. And I love the fact that you're hearing from all these other people. So I can't let you go. I mean, so for all of you who don't know, Jack actually sits on the board of the Screen Actors Guild, and you have a real, I would say, pipeline into what's going on in the entertainment industry. Now, we've seen NFTs come out of the NBA, just huge numbers there. How prolific do you think this is going to be over the next, say, 12 months, the NFT space in Hollywood or in entertainment in general?
I think it's going to be big. I just saw Mick Jagger put one out the other day when he put some record out where he made fun about getting the vaccine. I don't know how many people saw that, but he put an NFT out that went along with that to raise money for charitable causes. I think Hollywood is extremely interested in the space for a couple of reasons. One, I don't know how many people watch traditional award shows anymore, but I can tell you the numbers are falling through the floor. No one is watching traditional award shows anymore. And that's been a big thing that Hollywood's been involved in. And so they're trying to find other things that people are more interested in. And one of the things they're interested in right now are NFTs, which we talked about. So I think you're going to see a lot of interest there. I think you obviously have a lot of people in California who are more front edge investors, for lack of a better way of putting it. Celebrities who are more willing to endorse products, including cryptocurrencies, or jump on the bandwagon for cryptocurrencies. I saw somebody from one of the rock bands, Gene Simmons or somebody's now involved in it. And Snoop Dogg, I mentioned, is involved in Dogecoin. And all these people are sort of getting into this space because they're interested in it. They're more willing, I think, they're less risk averse in many cases. And some of the traditional entertainment industry things are just not making it at the moment. And there's a host of reasons for that. Traditional media in some spaces is just collapsing because of the huge number of options that everybody has in entertainment. We all know everybody can watch all kinds of things now whenever they want. And the crypto space and the entertainment space have that sort of common thread there, where they are in a dynamic moment of change. And I think the entertainment folks are definitely watching very carefully what goes on in crypto. But Hollywood's traditional base is sort of changing too.
Yeah, I think that's interesting to hear, because I mean, obviously, for people around the world, I mean, that's kind of how a lot of people know the United States, right? I mean, that's probably our biggest export, bigger than food. Is probably entertainment at the end of the day. And so that's very prolific, and it certainly will be felt throughout the world. Jack, can't thank you enough for doing this today. Always great to get your perspective. I would love to see more being done in the crypto space, more dynamic stuff being done in the crypto space and blockchain space on media. So I mean, anything that we can do at Duke to help you out, we're more than happy to. But I do appreciate you spending some time here with us this morning, answering some questions, and your perspective is always a unique one in the industry, coming from media and the academic realm. So it has been fun to have you here this morning.
It was great to be here. Thanks for having me all. And I liked your questions too. I thought they were good. One more. Oh, PJ's just thanking me. You're welcome.
Okay.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jack. Yep. Have a good day.
Yep, you too.
All right. Bye now.
Yep. Bye-bye.